Discover the incredible transformation. Single dad's touching blind date reveals hidden strength. Jake stood at the entrance of the diner, heart in his throat, as he pushed through the swinging doors. A blind date, set up by his ever-enthusiastic neighbor, felt like stepping into treacherous territory. How could he balance more on his plate? He barely managed the day-to-day grind as a mechanic, working tirelessly to scrape together a living, while raising his 2 children alone in the suburbs of Middle America. The weight of societal judgment felt heavy, akin to a lead blanket pressing down on his shoulders. Would he be seen as just another struggling father? As he scanned the room, his eyes landed on Emily, vivacious and confident, sitting at a booth, a warm smile lighting up her face. She was everything he wasn't, a spirited school teacher with dreams of reforming the educational system. Their conversation flowed effortlessly, a melody of shared struggles. Jake spoke about working late into the night, wrench in hand, while Emily shared stories of her battles against the prejudice in her career. For the first time in years, he felt a spark of hope igniting in his heart, but lurking beneath that excitement was a discomfort, a gnawing doubt. Then, the revelation hit him like a bolt of lightning. Emily's principal, the one tasked with empowering her, was as corrupt as they come. Jake's mind raced. How could he trust her situation, or their budding relationship? The realization bubbled in his stomach, intertwining with fear. He wanted to protect the connection they had formed, but how could he ignore the truth staring him in the face? Before he could digest this overwhelming information, chaos swept through his workplace like a hurricane. The owner of the garage had been caught skimming funds and was now out of a job, leaving Jake and his co-workers questioning their futures. Fear pooled in his stomach as stress mounted, creating tight knots in his back. Was he too comfortable just letting this unfold? Should he confront the injustice in Emily's school, risking not only his income but the chance of a genuine connection? The impulse to shield his kids from financial devastation wrestled with his yearning for justice. Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. Jake's mind spiraled as he weighed his options, each choice pulling him deeper into a moral quandary. He envisioned his children, 2 innocent souls. They depended on him to be their rock, yet their wide, trusting eyes felt like they were piercing through his doubts. Would they understand if he fought back for Emily's sake? Would he be regarded as a hero or simply as a fool risking it all? Finally, the knock on the door shattered his thoughts, sending adrenaline coursing through his veins. Standing before him was his neighbor with news that could pierce through the fragile peace he had built. New developments at work that would change everything. Stakes were higher now, pressing down on him like gravity as he grappled with a truth that demanded an answer. He was caught between protecting his family and standing up for what was right, and the clock ticked ominously towards his decision. The question lingered in the air, heavy and dense. Would he discover the courage to fight for love and justice, or would he retreat into silence, destined to live a life half-lived? Jake stood frozen at the threshold of indecision, anxiety mixing with the adrenaline from his neighbor's unexpected visit. The news about the garage's financial instability loomed large in his mind, but the revelation about Emily's principal felt equally weighty. Who was he becoming in this swirl of uncertainty? The very ground beneath him trembled with implications. He invited his neighbor in, an attempt to create some semblance of normalcy amidst the chaos that swirled around him. "What do you have?" Jake asked, forcing a steadiness into his voice. The man took a seat at the kitchen table, details of the garage's fate spilling easily from his lips, yet Jake found his mind adrift, grappling with the immensity of his circumstances. The responsibilities of single parenthood, the act of dating again, and now a growing urge to advocate for justice swirled like a storm within him, each competing for his attention. "Looks like we're all going to need to find new jobs," his neighbor continued, oblivious to Jake's distraction. "We've only got a couple of weeks of pay left." It's gonna hurt. The stark reality clenched Jake's stomach tighter. As the conversation progressed, an idea began to take root. He imagined himself standing in front of a school board, empowered by knowledge of the corruption that had been hidden in plain sight. The image of the confident, justice-seeking man he yearned to be clashed with his reality, a man shackled by fear and financial insecurity. Protecting his children came first, but what would he teach them if he prioritized comfort over righteousness? After his neighbor left, the weight of the decisions pressed fiercely on Jake's chest. With the sputtering sound of an old radiator echoing through the house, he paced back and forth. The muffled laughter of his children playing downstairs filled him with both urgency and resolve. They needed to know their father stood for something, and that meant confronting the unsettling truths that surrounded him. Jake collapsed onto his worn-out couch, running a hand through his hair. It occurred to him that this wasn't merely about him. Emily's zeal inspired him in ways he had not anticipated. This wouldn't just be his fight, but theirs. He replayed their conversation about Emily's struggles day in and day out. She faced headwinds he had only looked at from the sidelines. Was he being called to ally himself in this battle? To stand beside someone bold enough to dream of changing a flawed system? Fear stung his thoughts like staccato drumbeats. What if he further complicated their relationship? Yet the thought of doing nothing was unbearable. That night, after tucking his children into bed, sleep evaded him. Thoughts danced on the periphery of consciousness, no longer muddled but sharp with clarity. He possessed skills to analyze engines and to fix broken machinery. But could he fix this? The methodological approach he took in his work could become a tool for this greater struggle. As dawn broke, illuminating the breakfast table where he usually sat in quiet reflection, a fresh resolve charged through him. Fear was a constant companion, but perhaps existing along its edge, courage could surface. Surveying the empty chairs, he could almost hear their encouraging voices whispering his children needed examples of resilience, and Emily deserved an ally. Jake decided that today marked the beginning of a new chapter. He would dig deeper into the school's operations, gathering evidence to support Emily. He needed to know every detail, to craft a solid case against ignorance. The responsibility felt monumental, but so did the potential for change. That day, as he tightened his toolbox and prepared to head to work, a palpable shift coursed through him. He was not merely maintaining vehicles anymore, he was in training to be a voice for those silenced. Tomorrow would hold its own challenges, and the thought of confronting Emily about her principal devil seeped into his mind. The time had come to face both echoes of doubt and the exhilarating prospect of justice. Would he rise above his fears and embrace a role that could create a ripple effect? Or would he retreat from the crucible of change, escaping back into the shadows of the ordinary life he had always known? The morning dawned bright but heavy as Jake finished his routine of making breakfast for the kids. Their laughter was like a distant melody, a comforting chant that softened the encroaching weight of his impending confrontation with Emily. Today was not just another day, it was the day he would embody the change he wished to see. He found strength in the thought of stepping outside his comfort zone, finally ready to channel the messiness of his emotions into a structured purpose. After sending the kids off to school, Jake had planned to meticulously review his notes about the school's operations. But as he looked around the garage, the familiar chaos started to dissipate his resolve. Tools were strewn about in a disorganized manner, and scattered remnants of projects he hadn't quite finished loomed in the air like ghosts. He grabbed a wrench, his hands instinctively finding solace in the rusted metal, grounding him in tasks he could control. Yet, the unfinished repairs became a metaphor for his life half-finished, waiting for direction. He wiped his brow, realizing he had lost an hour to thoughts of Emily and the implications of the corruption she faced. This nagging urge propelled him forward. Being overwhelmed wasn't an option. Leaving the tools behind, he pulled out a notepad, determined to jot down everything he intended to uncover. The idea of compiling evidence transformed his anxiety into actionable steps. What could he find? Whistleblower contacts. Leaked documents. Each question ignited a deeper drive within him. The morning passed, but it was the solitary act of writing that made him feel alive, like a mechanic poring over a manual to decode a puzzle. The intricate details of school funding became clearer as he layered theoretical understanding with practical strategy. He felt empowered, no longer a passive observer but an active participant poised on the cusp of change. Each written word stitched a piece of his identity: a father, a mechanic, an advocate. Just before noon, he tucked the notepad into his back pocket and drove to the school. As he parked, his heart raced, each beat synchronized with the ticking clock inside his head. Jake questioned whether he was ready to galvanize the courage required to speak with Emily. What if she dismissed his involvement? Or worse, what if she didn't want help? The friendly exchanges they shared felt like a brittle veneer, masking the complexity of their intertwined lives. He stepped onto the school grounds, the stark architecture rising above him like a fortress. The air was thick with purpose, yet the gusts of doubt whipped through his veins. How could he approach Emily without appearing overbearing? Would revealing his newly kindled passion for justice undermine their budding relationship? He grappled with these thoughts, unsure if he was excavating the foundations of friendship or stepping through a minefield. When he finally reached Emily's classroom, he felt a surge of determination. But as he knocked and entered, her enthusiasm turned his apprehension into immediacy. She didn't see him just as a father of her students, she looked at him with warmth, curiosity, and something deeper that had begun to hint at possibility. They exchanged pleasantries, but the tension underlined each word. "Jake, what brings you here?" she asked, a flicker of concern shadowing her features. It was now or never. He felt the walls close in yet simultaneously began to rise above them. "I want to help, Emily. I can't stand by while something's not right." He saw the glimmer of hope ignite in her eyes, but behind it lay the delicate thread of the uncertainty. Would she embrace his willingness to join the fight or push him away, fearing for his own safety? As Jake stood there, caught between vulnerability and resolve, the stakes became clear. It was not just about justice, it was about being part of something larger than himself, facing the true distance between standing idle and rising up. Would his plea resonate as he meant it to, or would this moment mark the end of their fragile connection, setting them both further adrift in their individual battles? Whatever lay ahead, Jake now felt the weight of both anxiety and hope. The path unfolding had twists hidden from view. As they began to dive deeper into their conversation, something inside Jake urged him to push further, toward truths that could no longer be ignored. Time stretched out before him like an untraveled road. Would he step forward into the unknown, or falter under the gravity of what he had awakened? Jake's heart pounded in his chest as he extended his resolve into the dimly lit classroom, the walls lined with playful art that barely distracted from the burden of uncertainty that lingered between him and Emily. The openness he saw in her gaze suddenly felt vulnerable. Would she see his determination as commendable, or would it alienate him further? "Jake, I appreciate your enthusiasm," she said, carefully weighing her words, "but this is dangerous territory. We have to be cautious." A knot tightened in his stomach. Was she doubting him, or simply expressing the weight of the situation? He understood the gravity of the corruption within the school, a system meant to uplift children now crumbling under the weight of greed and neglect. But was he ready to pull the thread of deceit that might unravel everything around him? The starting point felt just out of reach. "Caution is important," he responded, forcing a steadiness into his voice, "but doing nothing isn't an option anymore. I've watched kids in this school, their potential hidden behind a facade. If I can help." His words trailed off as he caught a glimpse of her indecision mirrored in the way she crossed her arms, as if both warding off his sentiment and protecting herself from the danger they both faced. Jake took a deep breath, feeling a surge of hot determination. "Emily, I have skills that can help in ways you might not even realize. I can dig deeper, connect the dots, and maybe even rally support. I just need you to guide me through." She studied him, searching for authenticity in his promise. "What you're asking for is risky. A lot of people could get hurt." Jake couldn't deny the advice sounded rational, and yet, something within him began to resist the impulse to play it safe. For too long, he had been good enough, always settling for the comfortable route, but now he tasted the bitterness of inauthenticity in his mouth. He wanted more than mere survival for himself and the children whose interests he had always protected by simply being present. "I get that, but if we don't act, who will?" he challenged, the urgency seeping into his tone. "I've been spinning my wheels, not doing enough, always worrying about what could happen. That's the old me. If I don't do this, I'll be just another face in the crowd, another parent who turned a blind eye. I refuse to go back there." With every word, he felt the fire grow within him. Each syllable turned past complacency into something actionable not just for him but for the children relying on Emily's steadfast purpose. While she remained guarded, he started to see glimmers of possibility reflected back at him. Maybe the connection that had begun to blossom between them was not merely about romance but harmonizing their respective passions for justice. Suddenly, she uncrossed her arms, leaning forward. "If we're going to do this, we need a plan." Evidence circulated quietly, some allies strategically approached, and "Jake, I'll need you focused and careful. Are you committed to this?" Her question hung heavily in the air, ablaze with potential consequences. There was a fork in the road ahead, daunting yet exhilarating. The doubts began to disperse, replaced by a bold certainty. "Yes, I'm ready." As they started to outline their strategies using Jake's clandestine insights and Emily's understanding of the internal workings of the school, the fear that had loomed earlier was replaced by surges of excitement, a newfound partnership engineered by necessity. Ideas flowed freely, punctuated by glances that lingered a heartbeat longer than necessary. But as they began to collaborate, a murmur of caution wormed its way back into Jake's thoughts. He grasped the implications of their actions. They were on the precipice of a confrontation that could hold significant repercussions, not only for them but for the children they sought to protect. How far was he willing to go to unearth the truth? As the afternoon light streamed through the classroom windows, Jake felt the revelation sink in. Whatever they unearthed would change them irrevocably. Was he truly prepared to confront the shadows of the institution while strengthening the emerging bond he shared with Emily? The adrenaline left him restless, spiraling thoughts mingled with burgeoning possibilities. Would they find the right allies, or would the winds of opposition sweep in more swiftly than they anticipated? As they finalized plans, the weight of what lay ahead began to settle ominously around them. An urgent question flared inside him: what if the truth was darker than they imagined? How could their lives intertwine when shadows threatened every step? Would this newfound strength sustain them against the forces that lurked behind every corner? Outside the classroom door, the distant laughter of children echoed the very innocence they were determined to protect. Jake stepped closer to Emily, feeling the pivotal moment climb to a peak. "Let's get to work," he urged, yet an instrumental awareness tinged his voice, one that warned him, the dance with danger had just begun. Jake breathed deeply as he leaned against the classroom wall, the hollow echo of children's laughter fading into an ominous backdrop. The excitement from planning with Emily had ignited something primal within him, transforming his uncertainty into a simmering fire of purpose. He could feel the skin of his former self peeling away, exposing a new layer he had yet to fully inhabit. "Okay, what's the first step?" he asked, mentally framing their goal like a photo after a recent snowstorm. Everything was initially obscured by white, but beneath it lay a vibrant world waiting to emerge. Emily shifted, her demeanor oscillating between teacher and ally, but Jake sensed a determination arising in her too. "Gather intel. We need to understand who is involved in the corruption and how far it reaches," she replied, her composure seemingly steeled against the gravity of their mission. Jake noted how her voice refused to waver, almost as if she was channeling his own resolve. "I have a few contacts, parents who've expressed concerns, teachers willing to speak up. Maybe I can leverage that to our advantage." The more he articulated his ideas, the more energy surged through him. Each word sharpened his focus. "I trust you to keep things under the radar," she cautioned. "The last thing we need is to draw attention to ourselves." The looming threat lingered, yet he reveled in the realization that he was no longer passive. The school, once a mere backdrop to his daily existence, had become a battleground. Did he possess the strength to confront it? Could he truly navigate this landscape of deceit, where every ally mattered and every enemy could turn the tide against them? The night drew in quickly, layering shadows and uncertainty around their plans. They had exchanged ideas for hours, meticulously crafting a strategy that would allow them to circumvent the obstacles in their path without getting ensnared themselves. With each plan they laid out, Jake's spirit ignited further. But as he returned home that evening, a creeping doubt snuck into his thoughts. What if he couldn't follow through? Each interaction from here on would require calculated risks. The familiar comfort of being a simple father, a role he had comfortably claimed, suddenly felt constricting, almost claustrophobic. Jake found himself scrolling through old photos of him and his daughter, memories steeped in innocence and laughter. He remembered the commitments he made when she was born, to shield her from harm, but now, those very principles were challenged by the world outside. What example was he setting for her? Was she destined to witness the same complacency he had long practiced? Heavy with thought, he closed the photo app and glanced at the unfinished drawings on the kitchen counter. A vibrant cartoon of a superhero stood out, clearly drawn by his daughter's hand, emblematic of bravery and justice. Inspiration crashed over him like the first freeze of winter. If she could believe in the extraordinary, why couldn't he? That conviction carried him through the sleepless night as he plotted every intricate detail of their investigation. He catalogued potential allies, motives, and likely outcomes, but he couldn't shake the lurking anxiety that buzzed like static in his mind. Each risk he took could lead to positive change, but it also had the potential to unravel the quaint existence he had carved out for himself and Sophie. During his morning routine, while preparing breakfast, he imagined illustrating their journey in a story for his daughter. Perhaps it wasn't just their fight against corruption, but also a narrative of growth and the fight for what matters. He kept swirling the idea in his mind like a recipe. But as he watched the sky parade hues of orange and pink, promises of a new day, what form would the truth take? Stepping out that morning, Jake felt the brisk air touch his skin, invigorating his spirit, but currents of anxiety still danced within him. Every step toward the school felt monumental, as if he was marching on a precipice. The conversations with Emily had solidified a charge in him, a promise to unearth truth buried beneath layers of betrayal. Had he committed to danger recklessly, or was he finally embracing his potential? He realized that moving forward meant leaving the past behind, but with that came the burden of the unknown. There was no turning back now, ally or adversary, the truth awaited. But as he invalidated the doubts swirling in his mind with each step, a sudden chill slipped down his spine. The uneasy realization that perhaps someone was watching, someone who could thwart their plans, stood behind him, treading on that same fine line of secrecy. Carrying the weight of uncertainty on one shoulder and ambition on the other, Jake rushed to find Emily. They were about to cross into uncharted territory, but there still lurked questions of loyalty and deception tangled in the shadows. What awaited them as they delved deeper into the school's corruption? It was time to confront the threads of fate that seemed woven into their mission, but would they bear the weight of unveiling the truth together? As Jake hurried down the familiar school hallway, his heart raced with anticipation, not just for the confrontation he was about to engage in but for the transformation brewing within him. With every step, he could feel the weight of responsibility settle over him like armor. He was no longer floundering in self-doubt. He was ready to face the consequences of his choices. He rounded the corner to find Emily waiting in the teacher's lounge, her face a blend of seriousness and exhilaration. They hadn't just made plans, they had ignited a potential for change. The clutter of desks and chairs around them felt like a battleground though, filled with secrets and uncertain loyalties. Jake was alive with purpose now, but could his rising fervor withstand the pressure lurking behind those seemingly welcoming walls? Have you thought more about your contacts? She asked, her tone practical and grounded. She stepped aside to reveal a bulletin board littered with post-it notes, lists of names, and potential clues, each one an essential piece of their puzzle. It was like staring at a map of treachery, and it sparked an adrenaline rush inside him. I have a few leads, Jake replied, the words spilling out as a newfound clarity crystallized in his mind. "I'll talk to Mrs. Patterson. She's been outspoken about the changes happening in the curriculum. And then there's Mark, the PE teacher. He's got his ear to the ground." "Excellent. But we have to approach them delicately. If they sense any danger, it could blow up in our faces," Emily cautioned, her brows furrowing with concern. With each exchange, Jake recognized the ancient instincts for survival awakening in him. The overwhelming fear he felt before was morphing into cunning, leading to tentative exhilaration. They weren't just exposing corruption, they were carving out their own identities in the process. Later that afternoon, as Jake made his way towards Mrs. Patterson's classroom, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was stepping into a lion's den. He paused outside the door, the reality of what he was doing gripped him. Would this friendly conversation turn into an interrogation? What if she backed out, choosing silence over confrontation? What if her fears were greater than his own? Gathering resolve, he knocked and entered. Mrs. Patterson looked up, her expression shifting from surprise to warm acknowledgement. "Jake. What brings you here?" "Hi, Mrs. Patterson," he started, the casual tone barely hiding the tension thrumming inside him. "I wanted to talk about the curriculum changes. I've heard some concerns from parents and teachers alike." She regarded him thoughtfully before leaning back in her chair, her gaze sharpening. "You're not alone in your worries. Things have been changing, and not for the better. But why now? Why are you asking these questions?" The sincerity in her voice flicked a switch in Jake. He laid out the climate of unease surrounding the school, pointing to the broader implications. It was his first leap beyond personal stakes, he was advocating for others. The transformation was grueling but essential, and with every word, he felt the enormity of his role solidifying. As they delved deeper into their dialogue, he discovered hidden strengths within himself that had lain dormant. He questioned things he never dared to previously, the validity of authority, the consequences of inaction, the importance of his voice. His previous life had never required him to navigate such treacherous waters, yet now it felt exhilarating. When they concluded, Mrs. Patterson agreed to gather further intel under the guise of routine meetings, her willingness to assist igniting another flame of hope within Jake. As he left her classroom, the shadows that once dominated his view now began to fade. But as he stepped outside, confidence was met with an unsettling turn. A familiar figure loomed near the entrance, the principal, Mr. Thompson. Their gazes locked, and something dark flickered in Thompson's eyes. Did he suspect Jake's secret quest? The world around him spun momentarily, the danger wasn't just a possibility anymore, it was tangible. With each heart-pounding beat, Jake grappled with the realization that this path was only beginning to unravel. What tactics would he have to employ to protect himself and those involved? He was caught at a crossroads. Would he risk everything he had learned so far to brave the shadows lurking in the heart of the school? The question lingered in Jake's mind as he began plotting next steps. He had embraced potential but now faced the stark reality of hidden adversaries that could dismantle all he had fought for. His transformation wasn't just about standing against corruption, it was about discovering what he was truly capable of in a world that thrived on silence. With the silent tension expanding around him, Jake understood one thing for certain: he was now on the cusp of a confrontation that would define not only his mission but his very identity. How much more of this terrifying path was he willing to take? The next move felt imminent, and it could change everything. Jake's pulse quickened as he held Thompson's gaze, the principal's expression unreadable and foreboding. The hall around them buzzed with the usual after-school chaos, but to Jake, it felt like time had suspended in an eerie stillness. He could sense the implications of this moment thrumming in his veins. Every question, every inquiry, every casual exchange could unravel into something explosive if he misstepped. "Jake," Thompson initiated, breaking the silence, "it's unusual to see a student here at this hour. Everything all right?" The casual tone belied the piercing scrutiny in his eyes. "Yeah, just." Jake stalled, recalibrating his racing thoughts. He thought of Mrs. Patterson's support, the connections he was starting to forge. I was just wrapping up a project with Mrs. Patterson. Is that so? The acknowledgement curtained a subtle challenge. Jake detected the undercurrent of doubt laced in Thompson's words, as if he were assessing Jake's credibility, weighing the merit of his intentions like an investigator lining up suspects. Adrenaline pulsed through Jake. He couldn't afford to show crack in his facade. Yep, Jake said, injecting more confidence into his voice. Just discussing the latest educational policies and how they're affecting student experiences. The words felt tentative as they escaped his lips, aware that they needed to conceal more than they revealed. Thompson narrowed his gaze, and for a moment, Jake felt stripped bare under the scrutiny. Good to see students take an interest in such matters. Just remember, sometimes it's better to let the adults handle things. There was a finality in Thompson's tone that sent a chill down Jake's back. Of course, Jake said, forcing a nod despite the weight hanging in the air. As Thompson turned away, an idea sparked in his mind. He wasn't merely confronting a school administration, he was engaged in a psychological battle of wits. The shadows Thompson cast loomed large, but Jake felt a creeping clarity. This fight couldn't just be about gathering information, it had to be about gathering allies. Determined, Jake headed toward the library, where he could strategize. He plopped down at a table, the atmosphere brimming with muted whispers and the rustle of pages turning. Surrounded by the weight of scholarly pursuit, he felt buoyed by a sense of purpose, but with that purpose came the understanding that the risks were becoming deeper and darker. As he leaned back in his chair, he questioned how Mrs. Patterson and others might react if they understood the extent of his determination. Would they rally alongside him, or would fear silence them? The tension gnawed at him, reframing his perspective on every conversation that lay ahead. His fear of authority had transformed into something more like respect for the weight of their choices. Every decision he made carried enormous implications not just for himself but for those who dared to hope for change. What was the true nature of the risks he was willing to take, Jake wondered. Was it enough to gather allies, or would he have to go against the very fabric of fear that enveloped them? Complicity bred complicity, but could true change emerge from challenges that felt insurmountable? As thoughts raced, the door creaked open, snapping him from his reverie. Mark, the PE teacher, entered, a concerned frown painted on his face. Jake, are you okay? You look a little tense. Jake's heartbeat quickened anew, understanding the urgency of this interaction. Mark, I was hoping to talk to you about the curriculum changes, he began, instinctively lowering his voice. I think something's not right. I just had a conversation with Mrs. Patterson, and she mentioned you, Mark interjected, his eyes widening slightly. She's worried about what's happening. You should be careful. I've heard rumors about Thompson. He's not one to be taken lightly. A spark ignited between them as rational fear intermixed with burgeoning knowledge. An alliance was forming. Together, they were an unsteady machinery of truth-seeking, yet Jake sensed the potential for greater strength within their union. What are you willing to do? Mark asked, determination etched on his features. There was no turning back now, and Jake felt both exhilarated and terrified. The time for lurking in the shadows is over, Jake replied, feeling conviction surge. We need to take action. Let us confront the truth together. But as the words left his lips, Jake felt the once light atmosphere thicken with unfamiliar tension. The reality of what they were about to embark upon loomed large on the horizon. They understood, now more than ever, that each step deeper into this labyrinth would bring them closer to a confrontation that would define everything. With Jake's heart pounding, one thought pulsed louder than any other: how much of their newfound alliance could withstand the scrutiny and fear lurking in the shadows? The stakes were higher than ever, and he had just declared war on silence. The library's shelves loomed like silent giants as Jake and Mark began planning their next move, a tension-charged camaraderie paving the way for uncharted territory. Questions about priorities and risks oscillated through Jake's mind, each one accompanied by the steady thrum of his racing heart. Okay, if we're going to do this, we need a strategy, Jake said, channeling the urgency that coursed through him. We must gather more evidence before we approach anyone higher up in the administration. Information is our weapon. Mark nodded, his brow furrowing in thought. But where do we start? It feels risky just to dig into the changes without anyone noticing. Jake's mind churned, navigating the labyrinth of possibilities. The thought of blending in yet standing out felt cumbersome but invigorating. We could start talking to other teachers and students discreetly. Find out what they think about the curriculum changes. If we establish a broader base of concern, we can demonstrate that it's not just us raising flags. Are you thinking about documenting what we find? Mark prompted, sharing in the sense of urgency. Maybe we could compile actual experiences and implications based on feedback. Exactly. Jake felt a spark of inspiration. We'll create a presentation or a report, a call to action. The thought crystallized. We can present it as a genuine inquiry about student welfare, not just a complaint against Thompson. That way, we maintain the focus on the system, not just one person. As the concept solidified in his mind, Jake recognized the underlying challenge. He needed to step beyond merely gathering evidence to become an advocate for change. He leaned forward, his conviction transforming the atmosphere between them. This has to be about the truth, not just our agenda. We can inspire others to speak up, but it starts with us being authentic. Mark's expression lightened. You're right. Authenticity has a way of cutting through fear. We can build trust. Jake considered this, challenging the gnawing doubt simmering in his gut. He had faced authority before, but never like this. Each conversation he would initiate would require him to confront his intimidation head-on. Could he truly advocate for others while clinging to the personal fears that haunted him like shadows? Despite the tension, Jake's determination flickered like a flame. He knew he had to confront not only the bureaucratic walls but the fears lodged within himself. He thought of Mrs. Patterson's unwavering support and how she believed in the potential of students to rally for their rights. Her faith became a reminder that this fight belonged to them all, and it was time to embrace his role in it. Let us split up tomorrow, Jake proposed, the ideas tumbling from his mouth. You gather feedback from the sports teams and I can check in with students in my classes. We'll meet back here to share what we find. Mark hesitated, observing Jake closely. This could backfire, you know. What if Thompson catches wind of this? The image of Thompson's calculating gaze flooded Jake's mind, but it only strengthened his resolve. Let him. I'd rather confront him knowing I've done everything I can to help those who are too scared. If we shy away from this, nothing will change. Mark offered a supportive nod, but Jake was painfully aware of the fear lingering just beneath the surface. A wave of self-doubt washed over him. What if they couldn't pull it off? What if their efforts went unnoticed? But buried within that doubt was the quiet thrill of risk, the adrenaline of taking on the unknown. As they concluded their plan, a bubble of excitement began to swell in Jake's chest. For the first time, he felt like he was stepping into a role larger than himself, an overseer of change. But was it truly within his grasp? The next day loomed heavy with anticipation and unease. The moment was approaching that could either forge their path or shatter their fragile alliance. Jake's mind raced as a new thought crept in. Would their pursuit of truth truly echo within the walls of fear they were up against, or would it vanish like whispers in a storm? With a deep breath, he squared his shoulders. Tomorrow would be a test of courage unlike any he had faced before, a confrontation not only with the establishment but with the parts of himself he had only begun to understand. And as he walked out of the library, one pulse of clarity sat firmly at the forefront of his mind. The time had come to face his deepest fears. The sun broke through the classroom windows with an intensity that felt almost foreign to Jake as he walked in that morning. He could hear vague whispers in the air, a low hum of tension reverberating among the students. Each one seemed to sense the impending confrontation. He forced himself to stay focused, shoving aside the waves of anxiety that threatened to drown him. Today was pivotal, it was the first day of change, and it all began with him. As the first class settled, Jake walked around, casually greeting students while keeping an eye out for any expressions that betrayed unease about the new curriculum changes. Personal conversations opened like flowers under sunlight when he asked simple questions about their perspectives on school. He listened intently, recording each response in his mind, drawing parallels with Mark's own conversations with athletes. The students' honesty started to construct a framework, a personal manifesto against the alterations that felt like chains being forged around them. "How do you feel about the upcoming changes in our classes?" he asked one of his more outspoken students, Mia. She was bright and articulate but wore a worried frown. "It's like they don't care about what we actually need," she replied, crossing her arms defiantly. "It's all about their standards, not about us." Her words struck a chord in Jake, igniting a fire within him. They needed the authenticity to resonate stronger, a collective cry for assistance that didn't just rest on their shoulders but echoed from the very core of student life. A strategy began to formulate: gather raw, unfiltered feedback directly from the students to build their case. He needed to encapsulate their voices, their truths, into something meaningful. Throughout the day, Jake worked diligently to foster an open atmosphere, encouraging others to speak, to share. With each response, he could feel the foundation of their movement solidifying. Conversations with hesitant students flipped the script, some simply needed permission to express their frustration. Their concerns intertwined with his own. Could he genuinely face the fears that kept students silent? What if their collective voices could actually shift the narrative? As he gathered more responses, a wave of realization hit him: he had never felt this empowered before in his life. It was no longer about individual risks, it was about fighting for what was right. He felt a strange mix of trepidation and exhilaration, but he was no longer alone. Each student's experience drove him deeper into the realization that transformation sparked not just from strategy, but from connection. Jake resolved to meet with Mark after school to share their findings, but before that, he had a crucial conversation to initiate: speaking with Mrs. Patterson. She had been a guiding force, providing encouragement when doubt gnawed at him. He needed her wisdom and her backing to elevate this mission. "Mrs. Patterson, do you have a moment?" He approached her desk, heart pounding. "Of course, Jake. What's on your mind?" Her warm smile eased some of his anxiety. After briefly outlining the student's feedback, he could see her eyes widen with concern. "You're not alone in this, Jake," she encouraged. "But you'll have to be prepared for pushback. Change rarely comes without a fight." "I know," he admitted, swallowing hard. He felt the weight of leadership settle on his shoulders, becoming less an obligation and more an ambition. "But I think if I can rally support from the students and faculty, we can make a difference." A flicker of pride lit up her expression. "Remember, this isn't just about proving a point. It's about creating a better learning environment for everyone. You must be cautious and plan your next steps very carefully. Authenticity is key, as well as directness." As they talked, Jake could feel a sense of assurance growing within him. The fears that had haunted him began to shrink beneath the weight of possibility, replaced by a longing to unify voices for a greater cause. As he said goodbye to Mrs. Patterson, her encouragement echoing in his mind, he felt a powerful shift within himself. Tonight they would meet with Mark, armed with collected voices and bolstered by the fire of shared frustration. But would it be enough? As Jake left her office, a stirring in his gut warned him: the real fight was only just beginning, and as the stakes rose, so too would the heat of confrontation. He took a deep breath, feeling the playful buzz of rebellion quicken his pulse. Tomorrow would bring direct challenges, and he had to be ready for the truth that awaited him. The matter was larger than himself now. Jake glanced around, feeling the walls of the institution pressing down, a reminder of the obstacles ahead. How far would he be willing to go, and what would he need to sacrifice? With those questions weaving through his mind, he realized one thing was undeniably true: the time for transformation was upon him. And as he prepared to meet with Mark, the thought loomed heavily: would their combined voices resonate loudly enough to challenge the fear that hung so thick in the air? After a long day fraught with tension and revelations, Jake slid into the booth at the diner, the familiar hum of conversation enveloping him like a comforting blanket. The whirlwind of the past week settled fiercely on his shoulders, and he reflected on everything he had embarked upon. No longer was he just a single father struggling to find his way, he was a committed advocate for justice, an ally to Emily, and a voice for the students who felt unheard. His heart raced with a sense of purpose as he waited for Emily, their connection blossoming in the midst of chaos. Each interaction with her had propelled him toward a solid understanding of his newfound ambition. He had conquered the self-doubt that whispered incessantly, and now it felt like a badge of honor. When Emily arrived, her eyes sparkled with excitement, yet the anxiety beneath the surface lingered in every word she spoke. They dove into conversation, dissecting the gathering momentum of their campaign to expose the corruption within the educational system. "I spoke with a few more teachers today," Emily said, her voice steady but imbued with urgency. "They're starting to come around. I think they want to help." Jake could hardly contain his pride. These were the seeds of change they had planted together. "And the students?" he prompted, his eyes alight with conviction. "It's incredible, Jake. They're sharing their stories, and it's creating a ripple effect," she replied, animated by newfound hope. Each session of gathering feedback had unveiled more than he anticipated. It had shown him the strength that lay in alliance and mutual support. The courage to speak truth to power was a collective strength, and they were no longer faceless individuals lost in the riptide of a flawed system. A delicate thrill pulsed between them, an electric connection buoyed by conviction. Together, they understood that they could weave their stories into a narrative suffused with truth, illuminating the realities faced by those silenced by fear. As they discussed their strategy, Jake reflected on his transformation. It was profound, as if every thread woven into his identity had been resutured with a newfound purpose. A wave of excitement swept through him as well as a renewed determination. "Let's make sure we turn our findings into a formal presentation," he suggested. "Stick to the facts, amplify the voices we've gathered, and back it up with data. We need to show the board that this isn't just personal gabs but a systemic issue showing real repercussions on student welfare." Emily beamed at his enthusiasm, her confidence bubbling alongside his. "I can help with the visuals, and maybe we could plan to meet with Mrs. Patterson too. Having her on board would solidify our position." Jake nodded, feeling invigorated by their synergy. "And if we need to take it to the district, I'm ready. I won't be intimidated anymore." A sentiment echoed throughout his words, underscoring the growth he had experienced. Fear no longer dictated his decisions, determination did. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over their meals, the weight of Jake's responsibilities crystallized into clarity. He was confronting not just bureaucratic negligence but the very fears he had wrestled against for years. Their conversations blended into planning, and as they wrapped up, Jake felt buoyed by the transformative journey unfolding within him. He was not just fighting for Emily, nor was he simply standing for the students. This was a fight for himself, his children, and a future. The realization settled in his chest like a burning ember. He was capable, empowered, and unyielding. He understood the stakes were high, but an undeniable drive surged through him, pushing out all shadows of insecurity. Jake wasn't just emerging as a voice for change, but he was crafting a legacy of courage and influence for his children. As they parted ways that night, a surge of gratitude washed over him, accompanied by something he had long searched for, recognition of his own capability to effect impactful change. He wasn't merely navigating life, he was now the architect of a powerful narrative advocating for fairness. With each step away from the diner, a mantra echoed in his mind: he had risen from the ashes of complacency, and nothing could unmoor his resolve. At long last, Jake felt he had emerged not just as a father or a mechanic, but as an empowered individual ready to reshape the world around him. It was the culmination of journeys his own and those of innumerable students intertwined in a mission propelled by truth and justice. He was standing at the forefront, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, armed with the conviction that had taken root within him. Now, more than ever, was the moment to act, the moment to ensure his family would know a father who stood for justice rather than one trapped by fear. He had achieved not just a personal transformation but, through fortitude, established a path for thriving, one step that marked a monumental leap toward change. And now, you need to subscribe immediately to the channel to not miss the next exclusive emotional stories. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm. Your support truly makes a difference. Comment your reactions and theories about the ending. Share this video instantly with at least 5 friends who need to see this transformative conclusion. Don't wait even one more second. Only true fans of personal overcoming stories understand the importance of supporting the channel through these actions.